So in our last video, we went ahead and we made a new project folder, and you should have all of these files now in your new project folder, which you called Cams in Motion. What we're going to do in this video is go ahead and start a new assembly. So we're going to go to New, and we're going to click on Standard. We're going to go to our assembly files and click on Standard.im underneath Assembly. Make sure you open a Standard and not one of the other ones if there's any other options. We're going to assemble these parts into a camshaft, essentially. Right? So let's go ahead and go to place, and let's go ahead, we'll put the box in first, because the box is going to be the piece that we ground. You always ground your first piece so it can't move. So you right click OK after you put it down, and then all we're going to do is we're going to right click on the part and we're going to go to grounded. And what that does is it makes it where the part can't move. It loses all degrees of freedom. And we'll talk about degrees of freedom a little bit more in detail later in this video. But if you look, basically, if it's grounded, you should see a thumbtack going through the part. Let me show you what I mean. If I click grounded again, it will unground it, and that thumbtack goes away. You can actually even ground it in the browser itself. So you can right click on the part in the browser, or in the model as it's called now, and we'll click on grounded. And again, there's that thumbtack, and now the part can't move. It's stuck in place, and that's the idea. You want one piece stuck in place. You don't want all the other parts stuck in place. You want them constrained to the one part that is grounded. All right, so let's go ahead and start putting all these pieces in. We'll go ahead and hit place and open. And this axle collar inside, we actually need 3 of those. So I'm going to go ahead and place 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we can go ahead and go to place and axle collar outside, which we only need 1 of. I'll place that over here. Right click, OK. And then what else we got? We definitely need an axle handle. That's important. So we'll place that, right click OK. We only need 1 of these. The only thing we needed more than one of, was these axle collars insides. We already have the box, so let's go ahead and put a follower in. And you might notice that there is work planes on some of these parts. That's actually there for a very good reason, and you are going to need those in just a little bit. Hopefully you'll see, or hopefully it'll be obvious why you need them in a second. Let's go ahead and put a guide as well. Go ahead and put that down, and leave the pair cam out for now. We'll add that in the next video. But let's go ahead and add the ruler as well. So we'll place that one in as well. And then let's go ahead and start assembling these pieces. So if I want to put this guide on top, what's the guide do? Well, it's going to, in reality, it would guide this follower up and down so it doesn't sort of lean left to right. It helps guide it to make sure it's straight up and down. But if we want to put it on the top, you might think, well, we need a mate. We just mate, and then we click on the circles and we line up the 2 circles. And you could, in theory, do that, although there are times when you want to mate and there are times where you want to insert round objects. And this is actually one of the times we should insert it. And the reason is because if we go to insert, we can click on the cylinders we want, and they won't just line up, but they'll stick together. So I click on these 2 circles, and those 2 circles stick together. Well, what do I mean? I mean that circle is now lined up with that, and it can rotate still, and I'll show you what I mean by it can rotate in just a moment. It can spin around in a circle and still be in it. It's kind of hard to see it rotating because it's so uniform. It's so radially symmetrical, so it's hard to see that it's turning, but it can rotate. It just can't go up and down, left or right, or forward and back. Like this part can go up or down, left or right, forward, back. And I'll actually do a better job explaining what I mean by this. But essentially there are 6 degrees of freedom, and it only has 1 left. Whereas we can mate instead, and we actually will do that now. Let's go ahead. Let's mate instead of insert this follower into this guide here. So let's go ahead and click on the cylinder itself. And you know you got the cylinder selected because it shows you the center line of the cylinder. Click on that. And then I want to insert that in this hole. So don't click on the circle, but make it where the cylinder, like the center line, opens up. And you see that center line pop up. Go ahead and click, and you'll see that it goes in the hole. And then, let's try that again somehow. We screwed that up. Let's try it again. We'll go to mate, and then mate, and hit apply. There we go. It wouldn't let me hit apply earlier. But now what we have is we have this rotating device that goes up and down. So this follower will go up and down, but it can also spin around in circles. Now it can't go forward and back. So look at this axle. This axle can go forward and back, and it can go left and right and up and down. And it can also rotate any direction I want it to. But if you think about it, this follower can't rotate forward or back. It can't do a front flip. It can't do a side flip or a cartwheel. It can only rotate like a ballerina. It can only rotate in place because that's all its constraints allow it to do. So there are 6 degrees of freedom, and we've allowed it 2 left. So the 6 degrees are up and down, left and right, forward and back. Those are 3 of them. And then front flips and back flips, side flips, and ballerina spins are the other 3. So there's 3 directional and 3 rotational degrees of freedom, and we've left 2 degrees of freedom. Up and down is 1 directional, and spinning around like a ballerina is the rotational constraint left. And that's what a mate on a cylinder constraint does. If we can compare that to an insert constraint. So let's go ahead and put the outside of this collar, let's put it on this axle here. So we'll go ahead and go to a bottom view where we can see both. And I want to make sure I select the outside, not one of the insides. I want to click on the outside collar. And I'm going to go to Constrain and Insert. And I want to place, well, let's click on, not this outer circle. I want to lock this into the inner circle. So I'm going to click on the inner circle first. You can see I can find the inner circle. If you can't see it, you can change the view just a little bit so you can see it better. But you can see that inner circle has highlighted. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to place that on the end of my axle. And so what does that do? Well, that locks those in place. And then I want to go ahead, and actually I want to keep that view that I was just in. I want to, well, actually, I can't, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and click on the outside of this and connect it to the inside of my outside collar right here where the red meets the black, and hit OK and apply. And if you notice, what just happened was, well, it locked that in place. And if we look, now that I have an insert, this can rotate, so it has that rotational degree of freedom left, but it cannot move up, down, which is 1 degree, left or right, or forward and back. So it can only spin one direction, and it can't move at all other than in place. So it lost 5 of its 6 degrees of freedom. And so hopefully that's kind of obvious what I mean by the degrees of freedom, but that's all that's left, is it can rotate, which is kind of the idea. That's what we want it to do, is just rotate, whereas this I actually want to go up and down, and I don't want it to spin around left and right. And actually, if I want to fix that, that's actually super simple. All I'm going to do is go to Constrain, and I'm going to click on my angle, and I want to click on my directed angle, or the one that allows me to select 2. And I'm going to click on my work plane. I want to highlight, make sure the work plane highlights. And I want to click on this face here, and it should align those up to be 0 degrees, so that can't spin around anymore. Now it can only go up and down. There's only 1 degree of freedom left, and it's a directional. I've removed all rotational degrees of freedom and 2 out of 3 of the directional degrees of freedom. And so real quick, let's go ahead and insert these axle collar insides onto our device, and hopefully it's kind of intuitive and kind of obvious how we'll do it. But what we're going to do is I want to select, let me change the view just a little bit. I want to select where the red meets the brown, where the axle handle meets the box, and I want to put that in the drive shaft. Hit apply, and of course I'm going to do that again. I want to put this one here where, again, the axle meets the wood. I want to make sure I select the correct ring, and if I don't, I can just hit cancel and do it again, but I didn't. I hit apply, and then we just change the view one more time, and we want to put one more right here. This ring connects with, of course, this ring. And of course, what are we doing? Well, if I hit the front view, let me turn this sideways so it's correct. Yours probably doesn't look like that. You can see the axle collars kind of wrapped around, make it look kind of nice, right? So we hit the home button. And if you look, it just spins around. And the last thing we really need to constrain is the ruler. And all the ruler is really there for is to measure the follower's height. So let's go ahead and go to constrain. I want to mate the top of my guide, and make sure you hit the guide button. Make sure you hit the, or not the button, but the guide face with the bottom of my ruler here. So we select the bottom face of our ruler, and we hit apply, and you can see it's on there. And then what's next? Well, I want it to be able to spin around, but I also want it to lock onto this face. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain, but I don't want to constrain an edge to this work plane. Rather, I'm sorry, not a face, but an edge. So I'm actually going to mate an edge. So actually, I'm not going to click that. I'm going to reselect a different edge so you can see really what I'm doing. But I want to select an edge here, any edge. It doesn't matter. Just one of my vertical edges. And I'll click one of these close ones here. and I want to mate that to this work plane. And so what does that do? If I hit apply, if you look, now that edge has to be stuck, but it can spin around. So we left it, well, quite a few degrees of freedom, if you look. But the point is it's stuck to that edge, right? And I want it to be able to move side to side, but I also want to be able to turn this thing around in case I want to measure. Because if you look at this ruler, the way it works is one side goes to 16ths and 32s, whereas the other side only goes to quarters and eighths. One measures a little bit more detailed than the other, and so one's a little bit more advanced than the other. I want you to have access to both. So then all I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a face, and I want to angle that off. So I'll select directed angle. I want to angle this face off with the, well, any face really, the front face particularly, but hit apply. And then if you look, now this ruler should be able to move in and out of the way. But I could also change the angle. I could change this angle from 0 to 180, and it should spin it around, and now I'm looking at the other face. And of course, in theory, I could make it 90 degrees instead, having it sideways. So hopefully it's kind of obvious how this system works, but I can change it back to 0 just by double clicking and editing the constraint, hit 0, and it should all be lined up. And so what's the point of this ruler? Well, in theory, what I could do is I could have this ruler line up, and I can get my follower moving up and down, and I could measure how high the follower moves up and down based on the cam that pushes it. And speaking of that cam, in the next video, we'll go ahead and show you how to put a cam on here to turn the follower as you spin the camshaft. But before we do that, let's go ahead and save this as a template so we can put multiple cams on here. We can just clone this. So let's go ahead and go to File, Save As, and it wants to know what we want to name the assembly, and I'm just going to call it Camshaft Template. And then I can put multiple cams on this device over and over and over again and just save them as whatever cam I put on them. Go ahead and hit save, and then you're ready to move on to the next video.